Everybody, welcome to the video. It's Tuesday, August 10th, and we're breaking down this massive 15-game slate that we have over on DraftKings today. And you think there'd be a lot of good pitching options, but I really wouldn't say there is. Yes, we have Max Scherzer. He's one of the best pitchers in baseball, so he's kind of an autoplay today, in my opinion. But the rest of the pitchers on today's slate really are kind of just okay. Like Pennell, Gilbert, Ross Stripling, Odorizzi. Like, these guys are fine given the matchups that they have, but few of these guys do feel a bit overpriced, but we'll make it work, and we have some good stacks to talk about today to go with it, so we should be just fine. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to follow me over on social media, you can do so using the handles in the bottom right corner of your screen. And if you want to become an official Patreon member, link is down below in the description for that to get access to some extra content that I do think you guys will find helpful. And don't forget, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. There's just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on PrizePicks, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. It's an instant deposit match up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you to either PrizePicks.com, or you can use the link down below in the description. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And up top, we have Max Scherzer, $11,000. And like I was saying a little bit ago, he feels like an autoplay in my opinion. He is by far the best pitcher on the slate. Yes, there's Aaron Nola. Yes, there's Sean Manaea. There's some other good pitching options. But Max Scherzer, I feel like, is a step above the rest. And the matchup here versus the Phillies, I wouldn't say it's my favorite in the world, but it's still Max Scherzer. It's a tough matchup for any offense to face him. And he was excellent in his Dodger debut. I mean, if you guys played him on DraftKings that day, you were very happy, which I'm sure you did, because he was only like $91 or $9,200 for some reason. Makes no sense. He's now $1,800 more expensive, and he absolutely crushed. I want to say he had 30 plus fantasy points in that game, but on the season, he's been awesome. 2.75 ERA. XFIP even lower at 3.5, or I should say 3.4. The Sierra is below 3. A 34.5% K rate. He's got the highest strikeout rate on the entire slate, which in DFS, we are hunting strikeouts because they are very valuable from a pitching perspective. So definitely love Max Scherzer because of that 12 Ks per 9, not really walking too many guys. Does give up a little bit of pop. That's always been the negative with Max Scherzer the past few seasons, but I mean, the strikeout rate can make up for that. If he gives up a solo shot to a guy like Bryce Harper, so be it. And if anyone was going to do that, I would assume it would be Harper here, but you know, he's a big fly ball guy. He gives up 1.5 homers per 9 and 35% hard contact rate. But again, it comes with these strikeouts, so we can live with it. A solo shot or two is just fine as long as he can get us like 8+ strikeouts, which is always possible with a guy like Mad Max on the mound. In the matchup like versus Philly, like I said, not great here, but only a 3.75 implied team total. Decently heavy favorite. The Dodgers offense is like loaded, so I mean, he's always going to be a favorite here, which that 4-point bonus can always go a long way, and an 8.5K prop as well. So love Max Scherzer. He is very expensive, but the way this slate is today, I'm going to try my very best to fit him in cash games. I assume he'll be the highest owned pitcher, and I am perfectly okay with that. Then dropping down to another expensive pitcher, I feel like he's a bit overpriced, but it's Sean Manaea, $10,000. His last start did not go well whatsoever, but the starts prior to that, the past two, he had like over 30 fantasy points in those games. So the guy's obviously a very strong pitcher, about a 27% K rate in the season, only a 5.5% walk rate, averaging close to 100 pitches per game. Draws a pretty soft matchup here versus Cleveland, although Castillo had a very rough time with the Indians last night where he kind of got bombed. I believe the Indians ended up with 8 or 9 runs in that game. It's not a good offense, though. I mean, yes, Jose Ramirez is good, and Franmil Reyes is pretty good, and Ahmed Rosario is not terrible, but this is still not a great lineup. I know they traded for Miles Straw, but are you really that scared of Miles Straw? So they're a team that doesn't really strike out too much, but overall, it's a weak offense, and I think the Oakland A's stack versus Tristan McKenzie tonight actually does look pretty solid, so I would assume he could be able to pick up the win here as long as he goes those 5+ innings. Only a 4.27 implied team total against him. I would prefer if he was pitching at home in Oakland because it's a very pitcher-friendly park. Cleveland, not so much, but still a 59% chance for a win here, 6K prop. His numbers in the season have been pretty darn good. ERA and XFIP are pretty close to each other in the low 3s. 3.5 Sierra, 27% K rate, not really walking too many guys. Doesn't give much power whatsoever with the 139 ISO. Lean to the ground balls, about 1 homer per 9. If anyone's going to give him trouble, it's going to be J-Ram and it's going to be Franmil Reyes. Outside of those two, I'm not really scared of anybody in this lineup, maybe besides like a little bit of Ahmed Rosario, Miles Straw leading off, but I like the spot for Sean Manaea. He's your tournament pivot off of Max Scherzer, but trust me, I'd really try to find the extra $1,000 for Max Scherzer today because I just feel like the strikeout upside is much, much higher, and that's what you want for DFS purposes. And then dropping down to Logan Gilbert, $9,600. So this is what I was saying earlier, where there's some good pitchers on the slate, but they feel a bit overpriced. And Manaea, Gilbert, and Stripling all feel just a bit expensive. I think Manaea should be Maybe Manaea isn't overpriced, but Gilbert and Stripling definitely are. But given the options we have today, I almost think they're viable, even though they're super expensive, because they draw pretty good matchups here. I mean, Gilbert gets a great matchup versus Texas. I mean, these are two of the worst offenses in baseball facing off against each other, so this should be a pretty low-scoring game, although the Mariners actually have a decent stack. There could be a decent stack today versus Kobe Alar. I mean, I'm not like going to talk about them, but I wouldn't hate it. I believe their team total is like north of 4.5. So if you wanted to go to the Mariners, you could. But Logan Gilbert's actually a pretty solid pitcher. I know he's still a young new pitcher, only around 60 some innings on the season, but 3.29 implied team total against him. He's actually a very heavy favorite, 5.5 K prop. And if we're looking at his numbers on the year, they're really not that bad. 3.58 Sierra, 3.87 XFIP, over 28% K rate. Not really walking a ton of guys. Hasn't given up much power. Has a lean to the fly balls over ground balls, which I don't love, but less than a homer allowed per 9. Only a 32% hard contact rate allowed. And like I said, Texas is a bad offense. I mean, their numbers on the season, when you include Joey Gallo throughout this season, were still terrible. I mean, 156 ISO, over a 24.5% K rate, only an 85 WRC plus and a 293 WOBA. But you take Gallo out of the equation, it definitely hurts the power numbers. I mean, if you just look up and down the Texas lineup, it is bad right now. So Gilbert, even though he's close to $10,000, I actually think he's a viable option because I could see him scoring over 20 fantasy points in this game and picking up the win. So, a bit expensive, but I do like him today. Same goes for Ross Stripling, $9,500. Good matchup here versus the Angels because outside of Shohei Ohtani, I mean, who are you scared of in this lineup? There's pretty much nobody. I mean, there's a couple guys that are okay, but I actually think Stripling's a decent option here. He was good in his last start, only a 3.43 implied team total against him. Only a 4K prop, but he is a slight favorite here, and his numbers in the season aren't terrible. Now, trust me, I would much rather get up to Logan Gilbert over Ross Stripling, considering his strikeout rate's about 5% higher, and you only have to pay $100 more. Plus, I'd rather pick on Texas than LA, but Stripling's a fine pitcher. He's here if you just want to pivot off of Gilbert, because I feel like Gilbert will pick up some ownership, even though the price tag is kind of insane on him, but I think Stripling is fine, and I think the Blue Jays should be able to pick him up the win, so he's overpriced, yes, but I do think he's a viable option tonight with a low implied team total against him. Then if you're looking for a cheap SP2 today, I could see Odorizzi picking him some ownership because I was looking at all the cheap guys and I saw pretty much nothing I liked. Jake Odorizzi, though, versus Colorado, he's pitching at home. It's a pitcher-friendly park there at home, and the Rockies suck on the road, especially versus righties. If you look at their splits this season versus right-handed pitching, it is bad. They don't really strike out too much, but only a 72 WRC plus. Like, some of these numbers are inflated from Coors Field, but WRC Plus takes into account park factors, and my goodness, 72 WRC Plus is terrible because the baseline's 100, so they are way below average there. 300 WOBA, 146 team ISO. Again, they don't really strike out too much, but Odorizzi at $7,700, I actually think is somewhat a viable option tonight. His numbers obviously aren't that great. He's got an 8% walk rate with around 21.5% K with the Sierra and XFIP both around 4.5. XFIP is actually closer to 5, but not overly concerned versus the Rockies. I mean, I don't think he's going to get slammed here. I don't think he's going to have an amazing game, but pretty low implied team total against him at 3.67. Pretty heavy favorite, 4.5 K prop. I assume the Astros will be able to pick him up the win, and a 4-point bonus at $7,700 could go a long way on this slate. So if you want him, he's there as a viable option, but I wouldn't expect much, but it is a pretty soft matchup overall. But I think that'll be pretty much it for the pitching for the most part, so let's move right over to the bats. And the first stack I want to talk about tonight is the Chicago White Sox in a pretty good spot on the road in Minnesota versus Griffin Jax, who is really not that great of a pitcher, and the White Sox popped off last night. I would not be surprised if they do it once again. They're pretty much fully healthy. They got pretty much everybody besides Yasmani Grandal at this point. Like, this is a pretty darn good lineup. Tim Anderson, Cesar Hernandez, Jose Abreu, Yoan Moncada, Eloy Menez, Robert Vaughn, Goodwin, Collins. I mean, obviously Collins isn't really great, but I mean, he can still hit righties decently well, and this lineup is pretty loaded for the most part. Now, it's a little bit expensive, but outside of Abreu and Anderson, you can kind of fit most of these guys in the same lineup. They have a team total north of 5.5 today, and if we're looking at Griffin Jax splits this season, he hasn't really been all that great. In the ERA above 5.5, the XFIP's even worse, close to 6, only a 16% K rate, giving away 225 ISO in the season and a 38.2% hard contact rate with 2.25 homers per 9. He's been a little bit better versus the lefties, but versus righties, he's actually really struggled. Has kind of been reverse splitsies so far. So, I mean, everybody's in play. You can use lefties too, but Tim Anderson, Cesar Hernandez, Abreu, Moncada, Eloy Menez, which are like the options you'd want the most, and Luis Robert, Vaughn, Goodwin, Collins, these guys are all viable. All these guys hit righties or lefties pretty well for the most part. So you can sign me up for the White Sox tonight. Yes, they're a tad bit expensive, but if you use a guy like Jake Odorizzi, you could definitely probably make this work tonight. Although if you are using Max Scherzer, you're going to have to pair these guys with a cheaper stack tonight to make it work. But I do think they're in a very good spot once again tonight. The next team I want to talk about obviously isn't the most exciting team in the world, but it's actually the Detroit Tigers here on the road in Camden Yards, which is one of the best places to hit in all of baseball, especially when it's hot and humid this time of the season. And they actually draw a pretty good spot versus Keegan Aiken. I know the Tigers aren't the greatest team in the world versus left-handed pitching, but they've improved throughout the season because earlier in the year, I don't know if you guys remember, but at one point they had like a 30-something WRC plus versus lefties. It's definitely gotten a lot better. They still strike out quite a bit, but some of these guys do have some decent pop versus left-handed pitching, and Keegan Aiken is not a very good pitcher whatsoever, and they're on the road to get those guaranteed nothing at bats, and they have a team total of 5 today, which is pretty darn good for the Tigers. So if we look at some of these guys' splits versus lefties this year, it's really not terrible in the power department. Like Akil Baddoo, obviously we prefer him versus righties, but if you think this is a good stack tonight, you're assuming Keegan Aiken won't last too long into this game, so he should see a righty at some point. But Jonathan Scope, a 267 ISO to lefties. Robbie Grossman's got a 202 ISO to lefties. Miguel Cabrera, he's old and dusty at this point, not really much power, but he is batting over 300 versus left-handed pitching this season. Candelario batting close to 300, Eric Haas batting 313 with a 400 ISO and a 179 WRC plus. Nico Goodrum, he's been out for a while, but batting 250 and a 291 WOBA. Not a lot of power there, but he's been fine versus lefties the past few seasons, and then the rest of these guys are kind of lineup fillers for the most part. But Derek Hill actually hitting at the very bottom of the order. Not a lot of power there, but he does have a 111 WRC plus, a 334 WOBA, and a 321 batting average versus lefties in a smaller sample size. But I actually think the Tigers are in a pretty decent spot here. And if we're looking at Keegan Aiken, he's got an ERA north of 7.5 so far this season, less than a 20% K rate, giving up over a 200 ISO and a 33% hard contact rate. So I think all these guys are viable for the most part. I know the Detroit Tigers aren't really the most exciting stack in the world, but I think tonight they're actually in a very, very good spot. And then moving on to the New York Yankees here, and trust me, I hate rostering these guys as much as you do. I feel like they let me down every single time. Although, if you were patient last night, they sucked all game. Then at the very end, they kind of made up for it. But I think these guys are pretty viable tonight versus a pretty bad lefty in Daniel Lynch. His numbers haven't exactly been the worst in the world, but a lot of these guys do profile pretty well versus left-handed pitching, and overall I do think it's a pretty strong stack tonight. And on the road, you get those guaranteed thing at bats, and they do have a team total close to 6 today at 5.78. But Jonathan Davis, if he's leading off, he's $2,300. I could see him being very popular tonight. Giancarlo Stanton crushes left-handed pitching. He's only $4,500. I think he's a fine cash game option, or you could play him in all formats. Aaron Judge, very expensive, the most expensive guy in the team. That's in the current projected lineup, I should say. But I mean, he's great versus either lefties or righties. Joey Gallo, prefer him versus righties, but if you are doing a full-on stack, I like him in tournaments because people are going to skip over him because of the lefty-on-lefty matchup. He's one of the few lefties in this lineup anyway. DJ LeMahieu got bumped down in the order, but, I mean, he actually had a pretty strong game last night. Righty-on-lefty matchup there. Luke Voigt, he's got some pop versus lefties. He's kind of cheap, too, at $3,700, and he ended up going deep last night, I believe, really late in the game. So if you were patient with the Yankees yesterday, it worked out, but I mean, early on, they were just absolutely sucking your money down the drain because they were doing nothing, which I realize they're a very frustrating team to roster, but if you can stomach it, I actually think they're a decent stack tonight. And some of these guys are kind of cheap, like Andrew Velasquez, but like Gleyber Torres going on the IL. I mean, they promoted him up, and he's dirt cheap at $2,000. If he gets a hit and a run, I mean, that'll work on DraftKings tonight. You don't need much out of Velasquez to work. He's going to hit lower in the order, but switch hitter, second base, shortstop eligible. Usually you can go kind of cheap at those positions, so I actually don't hate Velasquez. And outside of that, I mean, if you need a catcher, Kyle Higashioka, Tyler Wade, I would never roster Tyler Wade. I hate that guy. He's pretty terrible. So, but I think the Yankees are in a decent spot tonight. If you want to stack them up, I'd have no problem with that whatsoever. Then moving on to maybe more of a contrarian stack here, because I don't think a lot of people are going to roster the Cardinals tonight, but I actually like this team quite a bit versus lefties. Steven Brault is a pitcher we can pick on for sure. Doesn't have a big sample size to work with this year, but I mean, I think we all just know Steven Brault's a guy that we can pick on. And if we look at these guys' splits versus left-handed pitching this season, these guys are actually pretty darn solid. Like in the ISO department, 262 ISO for Tommy Edman. Not a lot for Dylan Carlson, but he's batting over 300. Paul Goldschmidt, I mean, I know it's been ugly for Paul Goldschmidt this season, but he is batting 253 at least, well close to 300. But over the course of his career, we know he can hit left-handed pitching pretty well. Arenado, a 333 ISO, batting 320. Tyler O'Neill, 182 ISO. Yadier Molina at 261 ISO. Harrison Bader at 273 ISO. And Paul DeJong, the 8-hole hitter, has a 208 ISO. So this team actually profiles pretty well versus lefties. And they're not that expensive. Outside of Goldschmidt and Arenado, you can easily play Edman, Carlson, O'Neill, Molina, Bader, and DeJong here. So, I mean, this is actually a pretty decent stack tonight. They have a team total close to 5. I feel like that's a bit too low at 4.71. Maybe because it's a pitcher-friendly park in Pittsburgh, but I actually think the Cardinals are in a pretty decent spot tonight. And I think the same can be said for the Pittsburgh Pirates. I'm not going to talk them up because I don't want to talk about 10 stacks in this slate. This video will take forever, but Jay Happ is a pitcher I pick on pretty much every single slate. It's just the Pirates kind of suck, so I'm not really too interested there. But if you want to take a couple one-offs for cheap versus Happ tonight, I have no problem with that at all. The last stack I want to talk about today is the Oakland A's taking on the Cleveland Indians here. Tristan McKenzie is not the worst pitcher out there. He has a very good strikeout rate, but he does struggle with power quite a bit, especially versus righties, and he struggles with walks as well. Plus, this is a park boost for the Oakland A's going from Oakland to Cleveland because that park does kind of favor hitting a little bit. It's nothing too crazy there, but you can definitely hit pretty well in Cleveland. If we look at Tristan McKenzie's splits on the season, like the guy's not terrible, but there's definitely a few struggle spots that he has. The ERA is close to 6, the xFIP's around 5. He's got a really good 27.5% K rate, but a 15% walk rate, and giving up a 222 ISO on the season with a 331 WOBA, 34.5% hard contact rate, 51% fly ball rate, and close to 2 homers per 9. And if we look at the differences for him when it comes to lefties versus righties, he's got a 5.2 xFIP, 26% K rate, a 183 ISO, giving up only 1.17 homers per 9. But versus righties, he's got about a 6.5 ERA, 4.75 xFIP, a 30% K rate, but a 261 ISO, 2.8 homers allowed per 9, and over a 40% hard contact rate with a 56% fly ball rate. So you can pretty much use anybody here. He actually gives up more power to the righty, so I think Mark Canha leading off is actually a really solid option, as is Starling Marte. Matt Olson, he crushes right-handed pitching. Jed Lowry's a fine option, batting cleanup at only $3,600. He's a switch hitter. Josh Harrison, the new addition here, he's only $3,100. I prefer him versus lefties, but this entire lineup is pretty much in play for me. They have a team total of 5.23. There's a couple guys that are pretty expensive, but outside of Starling Marte and Matt Olson, it's not that hard to stack these guys up. So if you just want to spend up a little bit for those two guys, you can kind of fit in the rest pretty easy. And if you need some real dirt cheap options, I mean, Michael Brantley, Kyle Tucker, still too cheap. I'm not going to talk about the Astros, but a couple one-offs there, I wouldn't hate that. A couple one-offs from Baltimore I think are in play. I'm not going to talk about the full stack there, but they do have a team total right around 5 today. And there are some decent cheap lefties that I think you can use versus Casey Meissner, like DJ Stewart, Anthony Santander, and obviously Cedric Mullins is viable as well, though he's a bit expensive. But you can stack the Orioles tonight. I wouldn't really have a problem with that. I'm just not going to talk about them because I prefer Detroit just a little bit more, but they are in play as well. They're in the same hitter-friendly park that Detroit is in tonight. They're just not on the road, but I mean, it all works out, and plus Detroit's bullpen isn't exactly the greatest. But with that being said, I think that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, just leaving a like really does help me out. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to become an official Patreon member, link is down below in the description for that. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. And if you want a free money bonus up to $100, if you deposit $100, you get $100 back for free. Use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. It's free money. Why not use it to your advantage? But I think that'll be it. I will stop rambling, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you on Wednesday.